So, I'm very happy to introduce our poet tonight. Donna Henderson is the author of 3 collections of poetry, including most recently The Edifice, which was a finalist for the 2011 Oregon Book Award in Poetry. Her poetry, essays, reviews, and song lyrics have appeared in a variety of magazines, anthologies, performance venues, and recordings. She is a founding member of the piano and poetry performance trio Tone Poem, and a founding member and editor of Airlie Press. So she may tell us a little bit about Airlie Press in the course of the reading tonight. She's a licensed clinical social worker and maintains a psychotherapy practice in Monmouth and teaches creative writing and counseling in several local colleges. She lives with her husband Rich, who is here tonight, on their 20 acres south of Monmouth, where they are working to replant wetlands, native plants, and to restore indigenous oak savanna, which sounds like a wonderful enterprise. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Donna Henderson. Donna.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Tom, and I really am just so delighted to be here. This series has a wonderful reputation among poets, if you don't already know that. And so I was so happy to be invited and already to be with this wonderfully friendly audience. I grew up in Portland. I haven't lived in Portland for, like 40 years, but I did grow up here, and because my father was a great outdoorsman, spent a lot of time on Mount Hood and in the Mount Hood Wilderness and National Forest. My father actually passed away this last August, and when the first parent dies, my mother died about 10 years ago, and then when my father died, it's not only the one loss, but those of you who have experienced it, as you know, that's also the moment at which you lose both parents. So I've been thinking a lot about my parents and remembering them and remembering my father and remembering my life here in Portland and in its surrounds. So I thought I'd actually begin with a couple of poems that involve my parents and that sort of take place in this landscape or imaginescape. And then I'm going to go on and read a couple of poems from the Edifice, and then I will read some actually brand fresh poems, having just come back from a wonderful 1-month writer's residency down in the Summer Lake area. So I came back with a whole bunch of new poems, and I'm looking forward to reading them here first. So. Those of you who also grew up in Portland or remember the old OMSI, which was up around, yeah, okay. So I bet, though, you also remember the Transparent Woman. Yeah. Okay. Well, we lived close enough to OMSI that I could actually walk there pretty much any time I wanted once I was old enough that my mother was comfortable with that. And I was absolutely fascinated with the whole show thing. Where now she is still, as I understand it, in the new OMSI, but she just sort of stands there, right? They don't have, okay. So I just loved this, that you could go down there, the sound, the light, all that. And it was one of those images that stayed with me into adulthood. And as I sometimes do, one of the sources for poems for me sometimes is having an image or a line or something that just haunts me, and I don't really know what it's about, but I have learned to realize that it represents something important, and that if I just sort of turn to the image and talk to me, that the process of writing a poem will often be quite a discovery. And that was this with Transparent Woman. So I've rushed down past the churning bees in their glass-cased hive to be here on time, passing the boxes of petable chicks, the pendulum, fossils, past the fiberglass heart, huge as my playhouse, rushing through, to arrive as this holy light wobbles up from its stage-side canisters and the music starts, soothing and scientific, and the drape lifts off by the usual invisible means, and she appears in the basement of the Science Museum, half-lit, naked and marvelous with her perfect posture, lucite arms straight and slightly apart, palms turned toward us like the Blessed Virgin's, helplessly welcoming. And in that voice, sibilant and disembodied as a stewardess's, she begins as I know she will. I am the transparent woman, and I am thrilled again. I don't know how many times I've come, but it's good as new, especially that first I am, as she begins to describe herself, organ by organ. This is my brain, the voice flows as her skull lights, bing, clear tubes coiled behind her Jackie Kennedy flip of clear hair, and her content disinterest rivets me as much as her parts themselves. She demonstrates them like seat belts. No pride, no shame, no special affections. She just goes on with that detachment, revealing. These are my breasts, she intones, and they flash on, bing, like headlights. Pale green veins and glands spreading out from the nipples as our giggles start. And I want her to stop it now. She is immune to shame, but I'm embarrassed for her. It's too much. The kids laughing, me laughing with them, my small self already divided. This is my heart, my womb, my intestines, and with my skin, which is an organ too, she is all transparent, done, before our ridicule, awe. There's all the same to her, her entire job to fill with light before us, over and over. I don't know anyone like her. You totally get the whole thing, I can see.
I was 8 years old.
Oh, yeah. So, my mother was a transplanted San Francisco girl who married and came here to live. And she used to complain about the weather. And I came to understand sort of toward the end of her life that because it didn't seem whenever we would go to San Francisco that the weather was actually that much better. She seemed to speak as though it was a sort of sunny paradise, but it always seemed like it was foggy. And I came to sort of understand that maybe weather was kind of a way of talking about other things that were harder to sort of put her finger on. It's here. As I was beginning to figure that out, I composed this poem to kind of explore this. And it's entitled Weather for My Mother. Do you have a Macy's, dear? My grandmother'd ask each time she came, and it drove Mom nuts, the question freshening her pain, her terse, "No, Mother," pointing again to the life she lived now in the provinces, far from the city, as she called San Francisco, never Portland, which was only downtown, without Macy's, no Neiman's, no Balboa Cinema, no foghorns at night when the house was still, no Herb Cain and no Chronicle, no oleander, hibiscus, no year-round geraniums, no eucalyptus spice mists threading through the Presidio, no Blooms for lunch, no Clift Hotel chicken salad, no rendezvous at the St. Francis after work for old fashions, no sorority sisters named Deanie and Dottie, no friends at all who weren't my father's friends, who weren't, first of all, wives. So much there wasn't. Mom called it all this weather. And oh, how she detested it, perpetually missing the constant sunlight of home. Confounding my father, who insisted the actual days without fog were few and far between in the city, and showed her numbers to prove it. Numbers I knew had lied each time we'd visit the city, and I'd see her face there, the weather shining and shining. So as I was saying, we did spend a lot of time in the woods. My father, before he went into banking, which was how he supported the family through my life, had done a lot of different kinds of things. But one thing he did was work for the Forest Service for a long time, on fire crews, lots of different ways, on lookouts. And one thing it meant was that he knew a lot of places that people did not know about that were off trail, and that we could go to by way of bushwhacking, he called it. And I think a lot of these places, like these little teeny lakes, he would know because you can see those. I know now because I have worked on lookouts myself. You can see all kinds of stuff from up there that that you don't necessarily know about when you're down on the ground. So see a little lake and draw a bead on it and get there. So this little poem is sort of in honor of that, and also of the kind of feral nature of childhood itself. So as I read this, on the page it's a prose poem, but I'll read it along in a kind of monotonous way, because one of the things I'm interested in poetry is using language and the cadence of language as much as to describe, to really evoke that feeling, sort of being able to feel from the inside perhaps what it might be like to be a child moving through time and space in the mind in that way. So the title of this poem is also the first line. And be warned, there were some small critters who died to make this poem, not on purpose, but it happened way back then. In August, we hiked to a hidden lake. It lay a mile off the trail down a steep slope. We were allowed to run down that last mile and did, boots pounding, pack frames flapping against our backs. The first to see the blue gleam could pull Daddy's finger to make him fart, the prize. The lake lay in a vale. Pristine, he said it was. We found a cleared space on the bank, threw down our loads. We claimed our spots with our bags. Our feet were hot in our boots. We took them off, waded in. We stuck sticks in the mud and stirred to watch it settle down. We scooped up newts, hurled them against rocks to see them writhe and die. We plundered huckleberry bushes for fruit, breaking their stems. We stirred the fire with sticks at night, making sparks fly. We toasted marshmallows and made s'mores. They gave us queasy dreams. Mosquitoes sang in our ears at dawn. We woke up puffy and welted, our hair stuck to our skin. We soaked ourselves in the lake, ran from our scum. There were flecks in the pancake mix, holes in the sack. Forget 'em, our father said, sifting and flicking. From the skillet, a musky, sour smell. We went down the fire, stirred. We slammed more newts against more rocks, skipped some stones. We drank Swiss Miss until we were sick, threw up, felt fine. Following in my father's footsteps and out of the love for the woods that he did instill, I really had always wanted to work on a fire lookout, which I was able to do eventually, and I did one myself and one with my husband Rich, and then another by myself one summer. But to do that, you kind of have to pay your dues on the fire crew, doing the not so fun stuff. And this summer, a poet friend who was writing a series of work poems about the kinds of jobs that he'd done early in life inspired me to do some of the same. And I'd always kind of wanted to find a way to write about this particular experience of being on a mop-up crew after a fire in Central Oregon. And again, to try to get sort of in the poem that sense of what it was like to be doing that 12-hour hot kind of work. So I have this poem, and then followed by that, a poem that comes from my contemporary work. I'll talk a little bit about that, but this first one is entitled Mop-Up Crew, 1973. Nothing moved but the wasps in their crisp nests, some wisps of smoke. We started at 6, we walked through the knee-deep ash. We spread out and walked a grid, each to a section a mile on a map. It was mostly flat. There were trees, but these were black and cadaverous. We sweated inside our fire suits, yellow canvas, our rubber boots, under the August sun. We soaked the smoky holes with our piss bags. With our Pulaskis, we grubbed up smoking roots. The hours passed. There were no birds. Some deer, a bear, but they were charred, were dead. At noon, we ate our dull food, bologna on slick white bread, Fritos, a Zagnut bar. Shadeless, we sat in the rig and chewed until our time was up. Then we filled our piss bags, shouldered the straps, spread out till 6 again. As Tom mentioned, I work as a psychotherapist and have for a number of years, and I have, I don't in my poems write about in any direct way the work that I do. I feel very strongly that people's stories that they tell in that room are their stories and not my stories, and they're their stories to make meaning of. But I have written a little bit about my experience from my side of the room. And so I'm going to read this little poem entitled "The Practice," that in some ways is kind of a companion poem to the other one of work in earlier life, "The Practice." Through the door, then through the other door, then the wheeze of the white noise machine to its switch, the lights leaping to theirs, then the waiting room radio, then the noise of feet on the stairs, then the open-shut click of the waiting room door, then the rasp of the door sweep of mine, then the passing through, then the settlings onto her sofa, into my chair, then the hour. Sort of my every morning. Okay. And lastly of this series is a little poem that I dedicate to my husband, who's here with me tonight. We're about to celebrate our 37th wedding anniversary. And I have been thinking again about we're also about to host the wedding of a young couple who are exactly the ages that we were when we were married, and they're going to be married on our property, which is quite a lovely thing. So I've been thinking a lot again lately about that particular act of faith that is about walking into the mystery of a marriage. And of the vows we bring to that, a certain kind of surrender that is necessary in order to take that step. So this is entitled "The Beginning of February" for Rich. Now spring in its flannels starts its delicate tremble. Here a tree full of catkins, there a cherry's risked bursting its snug buds to bloom. This everything you'd asked on this day, half my life ago now, toward my pile of things poised by the door like caddis flies in an eddy fence, caught between the river's pool and swirl, between the life I'd planned and the one I hadn't planned. No longer separate, my things, not yet joined. And my yes was a kind of dying, the way cells consenting to split, surrender to mystery, the soul's containment. Outside, snow held its ground. Starry dark hovered over. And more or less with you, I stepped through the door into it. So I'm going to read just a couple of poems because one is a several-part poem from the Eddy Fence, and it's fun to have kind of all the time to myself to do this. I don't read it that often because it sort of can take up all the time if you're reading with a group, and it's in I think it was 2000 or 2001. There was a sort of emotional perfect storm experience that occurred as I think it was the first anniversary of 9/11 and of my mother's death, and then a huge section of Weyerhaeuser land was clear-cut directly across from us, and it was the forest that had been there all the time that we had been living there. And there was a lot of the poems in this book actually are sort of working with the theme of loss in a way of trying to come to terms with losses of various kinds, but and also especially explores the nature of nature. And Blackberries is about all that. So I'm going to read it, though it's in several parts. I'm not going to read the numbers on it, and we'll just make a pause because it works as in kind of movements in a way like music. So Blackberries, my kind of environmental meditation here. When we knew there would be no stopping it, in that year before the trees went down, keening and cracking, when we knew I turned away with my anguish, you went straight into those woods with yours, into the cool, tall shade of their shelter and whispers, to see again, soak up their presence again toward the days of the absence. Again and again you went in, as you do and do. And this 2 years later, fall morning, the scabby shaved flesh of the slope seen for what? The 700th plus time? It's 108 acres I've yet to get used to, the thistles, the slash piles. Well, I wish I had made myself go in there with you. Now I've neither the woods nor their memory. At least you have their memory, I said, which is better. I don't know if it is, you said, looking away. Lately, it's been so hard to love this world, and no solace in nature. Where's nature? Not in the fields with their idiot fescue, their uniform grasses that passively burgeon too richly, too greenly, before turning orange from the killer sprays. In August, the dust from the ruined soil swirls and swirls, thickening the incessant now dishwater sky. Even the weather seems unreal on each given day, its nature, too, transformed. Oh, there were always droughts, deluges, cold snaps that turned cattle to statues in Kansas, then settled in. Once these were weather's exceptions, extremes. Now it's all extremes, one harsh extremity after another. All summer the forests in Oregon baked, while the pine barrens drowned, Europe roasting right after the deep freeze of winter. I imagine a parallel weather inside each day, nature still in charge. Such thoughts never entered my mind as a child, to tighten the soft, open heart of my joy. Then the cathedral forest, the old growth was, and the clear-cut, both seemed the way the world arrived. Nature before an idea to compare it to, roadless and roaded woods, given and wondrous. Nature, an idea the world cannot afford, the thought came as I cut and tore blackberry runners to free some grapes. And this was true, I saw. Wasn't it how I began to despise all the bits of the world I thought didn't belong? Until even the weather itself was suspect, and the sweetness seeped out of the flavor of blackberries. Blackberries. Once they were simply themselves, succulent in their syllables, their compact chambered fruit, scribbling their tangled word over the pasture, softening lines of the paved and mown, unsubjected to judgment. Then I began to know the facts. A non-native species, invasive, aggressive, compete for the natives' space, water, and nutrients. No longer innocent, the blackberries. Or was it me? An aesthetic nostalgia the earth cannot afford, the thought revised itself. Yes, a nostalgia. What can we know of what's best for the earth except to be rid of us? By the evidence, Earth could be saying, long live the kudzu, English ivy, the crabgrass, all that thrives in the poorest, depleted soils. Long live the rapid and profligate greeners, soil anchorers. Long live the blackberry thickets where the finches took refuge in September when the forests fell. Long live the Canada thistle that fed them seed all spring. Long live all the opportunistic despised, the gulls glutting themselves on the rich rot of landfills. Long live the cockroach that feed on crumbs, the buzzards that feast on the ditch-side deer, yellow jackets that follow. Long live the meek, which does not mean obsequious, which means the undemanding ones, who make what's discarded and given their food, who'll inherit the earth which will not miss the rest of us. To love this world the way I loved my mother dying, not despite, but including her suffering, all she lost and became. Not liking, but neither resenting her thinness, her loose and wasted flesh, lively 8-decade-old gaze she lost, the dead loose gaze the poisons replaced it with. Sure, I had preferences, the same as my mother did, her other body, another life, but the love didn't have them, nor was the love nostalgic for what she'd been. Before we start, she told the nurse on the first day of chemo, before we start and I lose this, I just want you to know this is my own real color. She touched it lightly and twice, her fine, dark brown hair. Then she sat back, relaxed, and offered up an arm. So on a little bit lighter note, and a little bit lighter poem, I just over and over love the way that sort of going straight into that place that one might most want to avoid, whether it's grief or other places of pain, can be that it holds its solution inside it. It's like just by being that willing to be present, new life is able to come out of that. And in fact, I think that reminds me that I think what I want to do is read what I think is going to be actually the epigraph for my new collection. And I had meant to read it before Blackberries, but it doesn't really matter. It's from Rilke, and it's a little piece from his own, from the 10th elegy on the subject of pain. And this is my translation. How we squander our hours of pain, how we peer past these into the bitter distance to see if they have an end, though they are really our own seasons, our winter evergreen foliage, ponds, meadows, our interior landscape, where birds and reed-dwelling creatures are at home. I love that evocation of the place of richness that exists in the heart of pain. So as Tom mentioned, we have been restoring our wetlands and also the oak savanna, and I say we as though Rich hasn't really done it all himself, but he really has done an incredible job with that, and I planted a few wetland cedars. But what I did have a great deal of fun with was looking at the catalogs as we were deciding what to plant. And being a poet, what I was attracted to was the sounds of things. And when I read that we could plant, if we wanted to, we could plant an ash swale. Listen to how that sounds, ash swale. I said, I want to do that. So we actually do have a whole bunch of ash trees, and it was simply because I just loved the sound of that. And now get to enjoy the sound of the trees. So this is a little teeny poem entitled Riparian Zone Restoration Plan. I want to plant an ash swale. Its words say water sloshing around in a pail, a splash, a swath in the pasture, soaking the silty loam where trees will rise as whispers. And the cool thing is that they do that. They're all whispery, but I just heard that in the names. So let's see where we are here. Okay, so now I'm going to read a set of poems from my new group of poems. Let's see if this is the sequence I want to do. Yes, I believe so. How to find it. As I mentioned earlier, my father passed in August, so I've had to sort of, the revisiting of grief that comes with that. And this is a little poem about a sort of moment of experience of grief. Actually, before I read it, I'm going to say that I think these new poems more represent, the longer I write, the more I find myself just more and more deeply interested in the way language can not so much capture a moment or preserve a moment as much as what would be the word, sort of reignite the feeling and action of a particular moment, to really take us directly into that, not so much by way of describing what it was like, but by just sort of gathering it again and trying to make that alive. So this series of poems does that, and it's kind of the approach that I took with this little poem entitled "The Grief." The grief was bright yesterday, not gray. Sunlight washed the way, and a cool breeze. I crossed a pavement of shadows crisscrossing. Sky wore a glare, a glaze, a wistful gaze. I brushed a breeze from my sleeves, but it still blew through. Brewed tea against the chill, then bathed, then sat outside on the chaise, soaking in late low rays. And a little prose poem entitled Pause, again, just trying to sort of evoke a moment very recently. Pause. New birds or old birds singing new songs, spring songs in the cold. The hill is still in the thrall of dawn and a wan wind. The cat waits on the picnic table, rows in the vineyard wait to be tied. A friend waits for a transplant, laundry rattles on spin. Lichen lights up the oak's thin limbs with its gauze of floss, and moss softens the thicker ones. Spores stir in the pile of leaves, you stir beside me in sleep. Soon the next moment, now this one. On the far road, a school bus flashes its yellow lights, slows, then moves on. The poem, Dylan Thomas's poem, "The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower," is a familiar poem to many people. And that title is one of those things, in some ways, sort of like the transparent woman, as an image. But that particular line is one that just haunted me over and over and over and over. And so finally, I decided, well, I'm just going to title a poem of my own that, and then see what happens. So this is "The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower." Again, a fairly short poem after Dylan Thomas. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower, informs the slow orgasm of the rose, the doe's blunt lust for grass, the gross grunt and the grace note, all that unfolds, fizzes, races past, devours, force that outweights all restraint and frost and rest. While I was on my retreat, my sister sent me some lovely little gifts that might, by way of treats, and then I had a friend also who was sending me things. It was actually all quite luxurious, you know. I think they thought I was camping or something, and I really wasn't, but it's like I wasn't going to say no to all this great stuff they sent. And so my friend Diane sent me a funny little package of Japanese bath salts that I think she'd gotten in Japan that were absolutely the weirdest green I have ever seen. And Diane herself is a classical pianist, and she has an album that's entitled Alive at Dawn. And so I entitled this poem The Same Thing, because it very much fit a little poem about that gift. Alive at Dawn for Diane. I began in a bath while I gave myself a facial, starting the day under water and clay. The clay was gray, the water from your Japanese bath salts, the color of matcha tea. It sent a marriage of Kool-Aid and plum blossoms. Lying there naked and beholding the stormscape, it came that God is what moves as creation, compassion. When we enter into either, we are being God. I'd been wondering about the soul. Is it inside, a coil, or a cowl? I don't know. In this wind, though, I've noticed how a coil tries to tighten and a cowl to sail. Something I have fun with when I don't really sort of feel like I know how to start a poem or don't have any particular idea or image to go with is to use, what are called prompts, some little exercise to just sort of get things going and hopefully to kind of get in, for me, to get in under the radar. I'm always looking for ways to somehow subvert my own habits of cadence or diction or ideas or anything so that I can always be discovering something new, which is very much at the heart of why I write, is to make discoveries. And so the poem that I'm next going to read is, I decided to set myself the exercise of writing an abecedarius, and I think traditionally an abecedarius is one where each line starts with each next letter of the alphabet. So one line starts with A, the next line starts with B. But I decided to make it even a stricter exercise. So it's a 27-word poem. And the only thing I did permit myself 2 ampersands. Otherwise, it is absolutely alphabetical. And it's entitled Desert Plants in the Thrall of the Sprinkler, an Abecedarius. After bathing, cinquefoils dream exotic, fecund gardens, hospitable islands joining and kissing. Long moonrises nudge open petals and questions. Resplendent sleep's tailings unfold a veiled wild, Xanadu's yeasty zoo. I was so thrilled with Xanadu's yeasty zoo, I can't tell you. And I have tried a few abecedariuses in that way since, and I have never gotten anything as good as that Xanadu's yeasty zoo. So. Another poem for my mother, a recent one. for my mother. Once I was your other heartbeat, your deepest center. You were the world I was and knew. After all your life, I thought I was unlike you, the you I liked and otherwise. When you died, I began by missing you in space. Oh, how I longed to wake into your house again to the sough of your pencil crossing a page, to lie again on the flowered sheets of your bed as we did near the end, watching reruns of Cheers. And your absence, in part, was this, what I'd expected. An absence outside I knew I'd get used to. But in my afterlife, I began to sense your absence as presence, not some consoling idea of you vaguely around, but a presence. Call it joy. I didn't name, but knew. A quickening, a pulse, as though something in me had loosened to let a subtle liquid through. It feels like my secret, but others say they see it too. A presence so close that even now I hear my laugh sometimes or stretch my legs just so and am confused and turn to find you. Don't, then do. I think I will read, and I maybe will read it from yours. I think I'll read the poem on the broadside, and then close with a couple of others. There is a loneliness. Listen some dusk to the varied thrush, keening its single, long, cool note. This is what the thrush has waited for all day, the busy light leaving, shadows slipping home from their exile. For the spacious silence that hears it, answers. A slender bliss you might have thought despair. Listen then to your own, that other loneliness that is our vast capacity. You thought it longed for filling. It longs to sing. We've had a lot of rain this year, as we do many years. And I made a discovery when I thought at one point that the rain was really going to drive me nuts. And I was born and raised in Oregon, so I'm used to rain, but for some of the recent rains have just been a little much. So what I did was realize that if I stopped thinking about it as just rain, but got curious again, and spent time listening to the sounds inside the rain and realized that rain is not a single sound, it's many sounds that could make it less difficult to bear, and in fact it did. So, and this is the little poem that resulted, entitled Much Raining. Rain like an audience listlessly clapping, rain like handfuls of pea gravel thrown against glass, rain like the sizzle of ham in a skillet, rain like a tub someone filling forgot about, rain like mice rustling amid the recycling, rain like the thrumming of grouse in tall grass, rain like a radio tuned between stations, rain like a slash pile on fire, that crackling, Sometimes a respite while clouds catch their breath. Meanwhile, drips between rain like a room of clocks ticking. Rain like a woman wrapping presents in tissue. Rain like a child tearing into them later. Rain like the snap of rice spilled on formica. Rain like the rumble of tires up a driveway. Rain like rooms full of angry fists pounding on tables. And just when you think the rain won't end, it doesn't. I think I'll read a couple more. I actually had pulled these out because I wasn't thinking there would be enough time, but it looks like there is, so if you would like to hear 2 more poems, I will pull them out of my bag. People still go, okay, all right. Great, thank you. Shouldn't take me too long to find them because I cleverly alphabetized so that I would be able to do this. Oh yeah, okay, I know which ones I want to. I'm going to end with a couple of kind of fun ones. Excuse me. Okay. In some ways, similarly to the Transparent Woman poem, the idea of the supposed phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion has always fascinated me, and I'm not sure why, but again, it was one of those things that I just finally had to write about. I think what I have left to write about are there's spontaneous human combustion. Still to write about are quicksand and volcanoes. And we'll see what happens, but I'll read spontaneous human combustion and then let me find my spot here so that I remember what else I was going to read. Yeah. I'll find it. Okay. The thought that life could ignite without warning or wanting, that you could burst into flames in your lazy boy watching the evening news. SHC, it's called in the paranormal literature, where case descriptions abound. Mary R., the cinder woman, consumed by flame in her Florida living room, except for a slippered foot. George M. of Des Moines, whose remains strongly suggest he exploded, proving to believers a special kind of fire, fire from heaven, one writer refers to it. A sort of rapture, then, as angels are said when they sing to burn up in bliss. Extreme stress could be the trigger that sets the human being ablaze, speculates another author enthusiast who posits a preternaturally heightened susceptibility of cells to ignition in certain individuals, who knows why. Raising the question, who would want to believe if it's not preventable? Still, it is sort of thrilling, the thought that what sets one on fire might. A conflagration about you and you alone, efficient and traceless, producing a radiance which consumes its source. In reports, the person burns, but not the sofa, mattress, rug, recliner they were lying on. Skeptics and detectives, as well as Mary R.'s son, insist cigarettes and high blood alcohol levels explain it all. In Mr. George M.'s case, the tank of air and box of barn burner matches left out of his paranormal case history. None of which evidence dissuades in the least believers. Fact is, research supporting the existence of SHC is disappointingly weaker by far than the science refuting it. Though forensic experts agree, this is true, that by whatever means of ignition, women do burn quicker and hotter than men. When it comes down to your remains, they concede, we're talking statistically, it's definitely your women that are more completely combustible. I found that in the research. Okay, one more. Several years ago now, it seems like just yesterday, but my husband and I bought our first brand new appliance. We had always gotten reconditioned ones, and so it was just extremely thrilling to get a brand new refrigerator, and I was just absolutely, I just love this refrigerator. You know, came in a box, all the styrofoam, the manuals, all the cords, everything. So I'll finish with this poem entitled Ode to a New Refrigerator. Amana, even your brand name's maternal, festooning the blouse of your door like the name tags pinned to the uniformed bosoms of the school cafeteria ladies of childhood, efficiently dispensing mashed potatoes with their stainless spoons. New fridge, you command the room with your shine, all the chrome and glaze and gaskets and condenser coils of you still unchipped, dustless and greaseless, your operations themselves spacious, icy, precise as Kathleen Battle's voice just now on the stereo, scaling the upper reaches of Je suis Titania la Blonde. Inside, your shelves are not the grilled tiers of a prison or cage for food, but glass, transparent to light and to darkness, on which clusters of condiments appear to suspend themselves like schools of fish along the ocean's layers of current. And what a thrill that, being new, you came replete with a manual, your crisp instructions speaking to us like the apostles at Pentecost in our own tongues, on page 17 reassuring me in English, Spanish, and French that all your noises are normal. Each quirk a thing I'll get used to, all potential failures the result of something I've done wrong. Quotidian miracle, summers your cold ensures the slide of sorbet down a parched throat, the tannic chill of iced tea. Winters, it saves our stews and lasagnas. And this afternoon, hot from gardening among the new foods I will fill you with in the fall, I flung open your door to drink in simply the mists and frosts of your exhale, while my skin basked in their spill. And as I did, I gave thanks for your invention, for all that keeps you charged. Oh, may I be graced to never take you for granted, you and all that refreshes us daily, all by which we are each day preserved. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. This was really fun. What should I do now, Tom? Just stand here?
We've got a short Q&A period.
Okay, great.
There are questions people have, and I know
Okay.
one is, what writers would you say have influenced your writing the most?
Bill Sitterly has actually pointed out Rilke as one. I think there are two answers to that, and one are the ones that I know, and one are the ones that unknowingly I think my work reflects. And I really am coming to realize that that's very true, that Rainer Maria Rilke has had a lot of influence in the way that I think what he thinks about those sort of metaphysical, meditative kinds of work, I think again, not that I knew this, but Gerard Manley Hopkins
Yes,
has,
yes.
yeah, okay, do you get that? Okay.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because again, it's other people that have pointed that out, and then I see that, but I think that's very true. And other work, I think poets' work has infused the music. In some ways, I think that more than ideas, or there are these things that I think about, but it's often the music of language that takes me into that realm, into that place where I might explore an idea or meditate on something. So I think it probably is those poets that have done that. One poet also that comes to mind, and I mentioned because I think I had not read that much poetry really before I took a class and started writing. I think this was 1975, and a mentor of mine gave me a copy of some poems by Sharon Olds in an American Poetry Review, and I read those poems, and it was really astonishing. I felt like she's writing my poems. I had no idea that the language of poetry could speak so directly out of a certain kind of emotional experience. And it really felt very much, I mean, it felt so much like that it felt like she was stealing my poems and writing them. And I hadn't even written poems yet, you know. But it really did speak to me. And so Sharon Olds and some other writers like her, I think, gave great permission to write very directly and openly about female experience. So those, it's kind of a funny combination, but those are a few that come to mind. And then I have bookshelves full. A.R. Ammons is one. He's, again, for the sort of cadence and playfulness in his language. But those are a few. Those are a few, yeah. Yes, yes. There was a question. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Donna, do you set time aside, especially to write? Do you have a certain time of day that you do this, or how do you work your writing?
Yeah, good question. I do get up early enough every morning to have an hour before I really get up and get moving to do whatever else I'm going to do, and open the notebook and write. It doesn't mean necessarily that anything very interesting happens, but you know, one thing I found when I actually went to, so that is my practice really. I put words on the page and not necessarily trying to make anything, but get language going. Get a cup of tea and do that. And many times it does sort of feel like sort of useless exercise, but I had the most interesting experience when I spent this month away. I had not read a lot of my journals back, and I took a lot of them down with me and started going through them, just thinking I'll sort of mine these for poems. I could not believe how much I found in there. Some of the short poems from the new work that I read tonight were very much the result of going back and seeing, whoa, here's a poem. I had no idea when I was just sort of writing this stuff that basically was. So that has reminded me again of the importance of that kind of practice. What I do have to set aside larger chunks of time to do is the work of editing a poem or shaping a poem or finding, for instance, with a collection, how do these poems work together, kind of what makes a sequence. That I find does take time. I need to over and over carve out now and then to be able to just kind of enter the dream of the poems, and also to kind of write longer work. But that morning time is pretty sacred. Yeah. Yes.
Do you write in longhand? I noticed you talked about journals, and computers are so popular today. You do most of your work by hand? Pen and paper?
I do. I definitely do. There is something about the that very physical activity, the movement of the body, that seems to me necessary. And I try I try not to move a poem too quickly to the computer. There are some that I do when I'm working with poems that are really made of, where I'm making a collage poem, for instance, working simply with lines. Then the computer is really helpful because I can really just play around with it like you do when you make a collage, a different art collage. But I do definitely start in longhand. Like to get the body into it. There was a question, I think, Tom, about you had asked, and I could, if you want me to, talk a little bit about Airlie Press. It may have been that one of the earlier Airlie Press poets, but I can, okay.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, sure. The Eddie Fence, and now, how many do we have? 7 other books have been published by Airlie Press, which a group of 4 of us began in 2007. We founded the press, feeling like all of us had work. Since poetry doesn't sell, it's harder, I think, in some ways to get a collection published, even though there's lots and lots of good work out there looking for a home. And some of us had become intrigued by the model of Alice James Press, and then of 16 Rivers Press, which is in the Bay Area, that they founded a press on the collective model. Shared work collective is what it's called, where a group of poets start a press, and then the idea is that you make a commitment of membership, the poets whose work will be published, a 3-year commitment to do the editorial and business and other work of the press, so that the press doesn't actually doesn't need to spend any money for staff, but really can put all of that into the publishing of the books. So a few of us were kind of interested in that, and we thought, can we really do it? And so we decided to get together and bring up the editor of, or one of the founding editors of 16 Rivers Press, and just talk to us for a whole day about how they did this. And it was really useful, really inspiring. We loved the idea of a press that drew from and then served, as we thought of it, our habitat, our watershed, whatever people were writing. And they told us that this could be done with a minimum of 7 people, or else it would really eat your life. So we started with 4. And it almost killed us until we eventually had enough poets. We published our own work first, so mine and Anita Sullivan's work was really ready to go, and our books were the first 2. And then the other 2 founding members, and then we did a call for manuscripts, and the process has worked that way since. We put out, we put out a call for manuscripts in August. We choose 1 or 2 manuscripts, and then we invite those people to come and meet with the press, because the other question is whether or not they can make that commitment, and if it feels like a fit. And the commitment is that people need to be willing to come to a half-day meeting every month down in Monmouth. So that excludes, people at the farther reaches of the state, but not if they want to come, So that's how it works, and we have been really, really delighted at how well it has worked. We really have been able to pay for the books out of the subscriptions and sales and donations, and that funds the next set of books, and it has been going like that. What is wonderful for writers about it is that you really do have a lot of control over book design and over the content, and at the same time have the access to a wonderful group of editors. I know that my book, and other people have felt this way, was a much better book after that editorial process. But what was also wonderful was that I could say, this is staying, this is going, or I'm leaving this. It's really, the author still has full control. So that has been it. It really has been a joy, and we are about to, I'm actually really bad with numbers, so it's like I should know this number, but I think it's number 9. We're about to publish book number 9. And yeah, if you have other questions, let me know.
Donna will be here for a while.
Yep.
Her books are over here. Thank you very much for being here. This was great.
Thank you.